Lesson 12, the Exile and Return. And as we've done before, we'll do again, start with the history of that local area. And it's the Babylonian kingdom. The Judean province is what we are dealing with, but information about the period of Babylonian rule is scarce. It would seem that the Babylonians did not introduce changes in the provincial organization which they inherited from Assyria. Ezekiel chapters 47 and 48 mentions the provinces of Hamath, Damascus, Haran, and Gilead, known from the Assyrian period. In the wake of utter devastation suffered by Judah, a population vacuum was left behind, which existed for some time. The lack of deportees brought in from other countries made possible the return of part of the exiles in the Persian period, since no one had taken their property. Some populous Judean settlements seem to have existed in the border regions of Judea, the Negev, the Shephelah, and the district of Benjamin. Since all of these settlements were outside the limits of post-exilic Judea, it would appear that a permanent Judean settlement or population had avoided deportation in the Babylonian period and had remained in the land. The Negev district was probably detached from Judah as early as 597 BC. In any case, it is unlikely that such thorough deportations were made from the border areas, that's from the hill country of Judea. Groups of Israelites doubtless remained in other areas of the country, especially in Galilee and Gilead, where foreign deportees were not settled by the Assyrians. The large number of Jews in those areas during the Maccabean period certainly did not spring up overnight, but we have no evidence about them from the Babylonian period. Now, let's take a look at Babylonian history. In 585 BC, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Tyre, but the island fortress held out for 13 years. Since there were two cities, one was on the coast and the other was on the island off from the coast. And so everything that the Tyrians had, they took out to the island. And Nebuchadnezzar was not able to take that because they had good defenses in the sea to prevent ships from coming close. The city was finally taken by Alexander in 332 by building a causeway out to the island. Then the invasion of Egypt took place in 568 by Nebuchadnezzar. In 561, Marduk, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, proclaimed an amnesty in which Jehoiakim was included. This happened on the eve of his official coronation. He has left us no information about any military campaigns. It is said that he governed public affairs in an arbitrary and licentious manner. He ruled for 2 years and then was assassinated. In the campaign of Nabonidus, his successor was to Syria in 553. Now let's turn to the Medes and Persians. With the fall of Babylon, the entire Neo-Babylonian kingdom fell into the hands of Cyrus II, king of Persia. This began an empire that was bigger than the Near East had ever seen before. These newcomers were Indo-Aryans, the Medes and Persians. They were occupants of the Iranian plateau around Hamadan and Fars, and in the central western mountainous area around modern Kermanshah. The period of Persian rule lasted from 539 to 332, the time of Alexander the Great. Now let's take a look at Persian history. Cambyses conquered Egypt in 525. He passed Palestine and mustered his forces at Akko. He received help through the desert from the Arabian king who provided the water supply with the help of camels. In return, the area ruled by Arabia became free of tax. Then we have the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem from 520 to 515. Tension with neighbors may have been caused by uprisings in Babylon and other places that accompanied Darius I's rise to power. Darius passed through Palestine on the way to Egypt in the winter of 519-518. The fate of Zerubbabel is unknown, and his conjectured rebellion and execution lacks basic evidence. Olmsted, in his History of the Persian Empire, Zerubbabel presumably was summoned to account and was executed as a rebel, for his name disappears from our sources. But this is only conjecture with no supporting evidence. Egypt rebelled again with the death of Darius I, and there was unrest in the Levant. Xerxes I subjugated Egypt in 483. Xerxes invaded Greece with the help of a Phoenician fleet, and this led to the Phoenician occupation of coastal cities. The mission of Ezra was to enforce his law and the law of Persia on Judea. Perhaps this was connected with the revolt of Egypt in 459. He worked with Nehemiah, who was governor of Yehud province. The death of Darius II was in 404, and there was a successful revolt of Egypt. This is called the Revolt of the Satraps. It was assisted by the Phoenician cities of Arvad, Sidon, and Tyre. Pharaoh Takos invaded Palestine in 359 with the help of 10,000 Greek mercenaries, but he surrendered to Artaxerxes III at Sidon. Artaxerxes III, also known as Ochus, was unsuccessful in his attempt to invade Egypt. A major revolt of Phoenicia led to the destruction of Sidon. He led a successful conquest of Egypt in 343 and was assassinated in 338. Now let's talk about the chronology of Ezra and Nehemiah. R.K. Harrison says, so closely interwoven are the activities of these two men that some scholars have reversed the scriptural sequence of events, making Nehemiah precede Ezra and placing both of them in the reign of Artaxerxes II. There is an alleged conflict between Ezra 9:9 and Nehemiah 12:23, where in the former, Ezra is giving thanks for the restored walls of the city. Harrison thinks that the arguments for reversing the traditional order of events are inconclusive, and the present problem of chronology was made even more complex by adopting such a procedure. As Gordon points out, it is important to realize that the presence of an able administrator such as Nehemiah would be a virtual necessity if the mistakes and failures of an overzealous and impractical scribe such as Ezra were to be rectified, and that the reverse situation would hardly be true to the facts of the case. And I quote Cyrus Gordon here, "I follow the traditional view that Ezra's mission preceded Nehemiah's. However, the sequence and chronology of the two leaders have been hotly contested by inconclusive arguments on both sides. The subject is covered with objectivity and full documentation by H. Rowley, The Chronological Order of Ezra and Nehemiah." This is in the Ignaz Goltzinger Memorial Volume. My adherence to the older view is not prompted by tradition alone. More cogent are considerations arising from the fact that the practical administrator, Nehemiah, would be needed to straighten out the failure of the impractical scribe Ezra, rather than vice versa. Clifford M. Jones, in the Cambridge Bible Commentary on the NEB, says, "When Nehemiah began to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, he was helped by Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priests." But one of the Elephantine letters tells us that Eliashib's grandson was high priest when this letter was written in 408 BC. Furthermore, another letter written in 408 BC mentions a request to the sons of Sanballat asking for help. Sanballat was a contemporary of Nehemiah. It is therefore impossible to believe that Nehemiah came to Jerusalem as late as the reign of Artaxerxes II, and it seems highly probable that he came to Jerusalem in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes I. That is 444 BC. No agreement on scholars about the date of the return of Ezra, and suggested dates include 458, 428, 398 BC. Now there's also a problem with Zerubbabel and Shealtiel. Jacob M. Myers says, one of the difficulties is that Pedaiah is said to be the father of Zerubbabel, whereas in other places his father is Shealtiel. The Septuagint, probably for this reason, alters Pedaiah to Shealtiel, but either Shealtiel died early, after which Pedaiah became head of the family, or the latter may be married to the childless widow of the former. Rudolph, following Nettler, says in which case Zerubbabel would have been regarded as Shealtiel's son in accordance with Levirate marriage rules. Now, Judea under Persian rule. Persians practiced a certain measure of liberality concerning internal freedom and religious and ethnic autonomy throughout the empire. reorganization of the Persian Empire into 20 satrapies, which was further divided into 120 provinces. Judea was in the 5th satrapy of the satrapy beyond the river. This was in Phoenicia, Syria, Palestine, and Cyprus, according to Herodotus. This is the first use of Palestivan as a designation for the whole country. Secondary units were called Medina, and the tertiary units Pelachim. The governor was satrapies. The official was Pihat. The governors of Judea, we have many of them mentioned. We have Sheshbazzar, the son of Jehoiakim. Cyrus appointed him governor. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the nephew of Sheshbazzar. Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, in the time of Artaxerxes I. Bagoi, or Bagoi, mentioned in the Elephantine papyri in the time of Darius II. Yehoetzer, known from seal impressions found at Ramat Rahel. Ozai, from seal impressions at Ramat Rahel. Hezekiah, a coin inscription found at Bethsur and Tel Jamna, probably is Ezekias, a high priest in the early Hellenistic period. Apparently the latter three held the office of governor and high priest at the same time. And then the boundaries. We have three sources for the boundaries of these provinces. We have Nehemiah's reconstruction of the wall and the list of people. The lists of those returning from captivity in Ezra 2, 21-34, and places of the sons of the singers who came to Jerusalem for the dedication of the wall. Northern Gibeon, Mizpah, Bethel, Bezrot, corresponds roughly to the northern boundary of Rehoboam. In the east, we have the Jordan River. The southern is Netophah, Tekoa, and Bethsur. In the southwestern, Judah had kept the district of Keilah, including the valley of Elah and Azekah. In the western province, we have Zanoah, Kiryat Yarim, Kepharah, Beth Horon, and Emmaus. From Beth Horon, the boundary returned eastwards toward Gibeon. There is a problem in the western boundary with Lod, Hadid, and Ono. The province of Judah had roughly the shape of a rectangle. North-south along the watershed of the Mediterranean and the Jordan Valley, from Ramallah to near Hebron, east-west from Jordan to the foot of the Mediterranean versant of its mountains. North and south it equaled 25 miles, and east and west 32 miles, the total area of 800 square miles. The smallness of the cultivable area and the long period of peace under Persian rule produced in Judah a surplus of population. The Greek historians noted with astonishment that the Jews reared all their children, not exposing any, as was the Greek custom. This population surplus explains the extension of Jewish settlement into the coastal plain and the mountains north of Judah, and in particular into the districts of Aqrabah, Apharema, Timnah, and Lod, as well as into Galilee and Gilead. Then we have districts and sub-districts. We have Jerusalem and Ramat Rahel. It's made up of Jerusalem and Gibeon, Keilah and Adullam, that is Zanoah and Keilah. Mizpah Gibeon is Mizpah. Beth Hakerem, Bethsur and Tekoa, Jericho Sana'a is Jericho. To sum up, Judah was divided into 6 districts and 12 sub-districts. The division was based upon Josiah's administrative arrangements. The districts of Nehemiah, in their turn, formed the basis of the latter division into toparchies. Then there are other provinces. We have the province of Samaria, Idumea, inhabited by Edomite Arabs who moved there after the fall of Jerusalem, Ashdod, Ammon, Tobiah is the Ammonite servant. The coastal area, there's a drastic changes. The Persians needed naval power, and the Phoenicians needed cultivable land. And we have Megiddo. It included Akko, Duru, the Sharon from Cape Carmel to the Yarkon.